This is wonderful. We've got a, a Zoom crowd, but we got folks in the room, and that makes me really happy. So welcome, welcome, welcome to the Humanists of Greater Portland. We're here this Sunday solstice weekend. For those that you celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas, Happy Solstice, and Happy Hanukkah. So this dark days of winter bring us together today, and the good news is it's the light is going to turn. We're going to have longer days, and I so look forward to that. Humanism is a philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. Humanists strive to lead meaningful and ethical lives. We use reason and empathy to guide our decisions and actions. We live meaningful lives because we honor the fact that this is the only life of which we are certain. As humanists, we affirm the dignity and worth of all people. We do this not only to acknowledge that all that humans have accomplished in the arts, science, and humanities, but also simply for the possibility for peace and well being when people interact with respect for one another. Our reader this morning is going to be Jeremy, and I want to thank him for being the sub MC last week. He did. Rumor has it he did a great job. So, thank you, Jeremy, so much. Come on up and please be our reader this morning.
Well, good morning, everyone. I know you weren't quite sick of me yet, so I'll give you one more chance. Then I'll take a little break for a while. So I am a solstice baby. I just celebrated another revolution around the sun. And this year had many ups and downs. I think a lot of us can kind of relate to that. But it always gets me thinking about our place in the universe and where we're at with our lives. So it reminds me of a particular excerpt from a reading by Carl Sagan from The Pale Blue Dot. Yeah, this is a special reading for me because I think it helps put into focus our particular role in the universe and where we think we often are at the center of things and where we really are in the grand scheme of it all. From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. But for us, it's different. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you have ever heard of every human being who has ever existed, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering. Thousands of confident religions, ideologies, economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor, and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph, they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity and all this vastness, there is no hint that will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could ever migrate. Visit, yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character building experience. There's perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
Thank you, Jeremy, so much. What a wonderful reading for this time of year, and also as we start the new year. Just remember, just a pale blue dot. Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce our speaker now. Our topic today, Hidden Threats to Democracy, incorporates the humanist commitments of social justice and responsibility. Our speaker today, David Delk, is a citizen activist. He is a member of the First Unitarian Church here in Portland and a leader in the Economic Justice Action Group, both locally and nationally, which is a Unitarian group. Nationally, they work on economic issues, including those of surrounding militarism. And locally, he's working on Oregon state law that includes campaign finance reform and also a reform of our state kicker tax. David, thank you so much for coming today and speaking on this very important topic. Much appreciated.
Well, I am really excited to be here. And it's really great to see this many people.
Isn't it? I'm thrilled too.
Yeah, someone warned me that there might be about 50 people here. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I see a few people here I know, and that's wonderful. And I see a couple of people on Zoom that I know also. So, and I think they're here because I said, you can do this, you should do this. So thank you. I am a member of the Unitarian Church. I have been for probably about 25 years. The Unitarian Church, I won't go on about the Unitarian Church, but the Unitarian Church has been a big part of my life since I was this young. I was starting to tell Helen earlier that I first encountered the First Unitarian Church when I was growing up in Goose Hollow, and I could see, looking forward, the steeple of the church. I didn't have any idea what it was about, but it was inspirational. Later on, when I was in high school, the Unitarian Church was involved in needle exchanges, a very controversial thing at the time, can generate some controversy now. And they were also in the process of helping outside in get established. So these were always positive things in my mind. And then later, my current partner and I have been together. Where is he? There he is right there. That's Tom. He and I have been together 32 years. And prior to him, I had another partner who died of AIDS. And a year or so after that, the First Unitarian Church welcomed gay people into the sanctuary with their friends. I thought, my God, what kind of church is this? Churches don't do this. I was a little naive, but this is what the First Unitarian Church does. And that's why I've been very glad to be a member of the church for all these years. So anyway, that's a little history. Now I'll get it on with the main thing. I'll also say, I think you all got this sheet. I will refer to it later, and so we'll pour over that. And I also have some things on the table outside. There's some issues of Justice Rising, which is a periodical publication of the Alliance for Democracy, which is a national group you've probably never heard of. But we like to think we're important. We do these wonderful publications called Justice Risings on a number of different topics. I think some of you may have gotten another copy in the past. I was invited here to speak before about public banking. which I was very grateful to do. And so one of the issues that we did was on public banking, and it's referred to quite frequently. It's very informative. Today, I brought not the most recent issue, but almost the most recent issue of Justice Risings, which has to do with peace and war, and some things we can do about it. It's very informative, so I invite you to pick that up out there, and that this is out there also. This is just a notice of where the Alliance for Democracy Portland group and other groups, including the Economic Justice Action Group at the First Unitarian Church, gather on Saturdays to protest war and to call attention to the economic and environmental damages that war does. And so I point this out in particular because we're not doing this right now. And certainly to look at this, you'd think we are. But it's been too cold, and most of us are too old to be out in the cold for an hour and a half. So yeah, but we will be starting again probably in April, May. So watch for us. If you're interested in participating, let me know. I'll put you on a list so you can get notices about it. Okay, here we go. Here's the formal presentation. Reverend Martin Luther King, in his April 1967 speech at the Riverside Church in New York City, titled "Beyond Vietnam: A Time to Break Silence," said in part, "True compassion is more than flinging a coin at a beggar or to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring." And he further went on to say, "A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death." I can say that America is in the spiral of spiritual death right now. American democracy is in a severe crisis. No matter what your political beliefs, I don't know of anyone who disagrees with this. In addressing the American democracy crisis, you likely expect that I'm going to talk about things like voter suppression, the closing of voting polls places, increased ID requirements, intimidation of voters, and a whole lot more, including the redrawing of political boundaries by state legislatures to make them safe districts, the telling of the big lie. Instead, today, I want to talk about three anti-democratic institutional aspects of our political system: the U.S. Supreme Court and its embrace of corporate personhood, and the allowing of corporate interests to have free speech rights, especially during political campaigns, the ever-growing gap between the very, very rich and the rest of us, and the military-industrial complex. So I am going to focus most of my attention on the military-industrial complex. This came about because I had developed this talk about the military-industrial complex for a democracy fair we had at the First Unitarian Church. And then I took it on the road, so to speak, and presented it to a number of other Unitarian churches around the state and some non-church groups as well. One of the people who listened to my presentation at the McMinnville Unitarian Church liked what I said and thought it would be worthwhile for me to present here. So I thought, great, I got an invitation. Wonderful. This is the way this is supposed to work. This almost feels like a movement. But Helen said, make it longer. And so I did. Well, luckily I had done another talk about these three threats to democracy. So I mashed these two together smoothly, I hope. We'll find out. So let's first start with the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court is an inherently undemocratic institution. We, the voters, who are supposed to be the deciders, have no input into who becomes a Supreme Court judge, as the president makes the nominations, and then the U.S. Senate, another inherently undemocratic institution that we won't talk about today, holds hearings, and votes to confirm. That's their only role. There is no popular engagement in this process. We are completely excluded. The justices, in turn, are allowed to review lower court cases in order to determine case law and make sweeping decisions for the entire nation. In fact, the Constitution does not give this power to the courts, but nonetheless, the Supreme Court has adopted this as its duty. Accountability is a fundamental bedrock foundation of any democratic system. Yet here we have the Supreme Court as a concentration of power with virtually no accountability. Therefore, the court is a clear threat to democracy. They have, over the past decade, allowed and encouraged extreme gerrymandering and opened the floodgates to dark money in the political system. That would be the Citizens United decision and some others, and gutted the Voting Rights Act, and most recently abolished a woman's right to choose. 5 people made those decisions. In an article published in The Guardian titled, "The Supreme Court Has Become a Threat to Democracy," here's how we fix it. The author writes, "The Republican strategy is clear. Rig and skew elections to win legislative power in states and in the Senate, despite the party's minority level of popular support. Use that leverage to pack the courts with partisans, and then use those packed courts to further skew the electoral process and block rival legislation as a way to hold on to power. This is what a judicial coup looks like and how it is accomplished. The Supreme Court has functioned as an anti-democratic institution that produces anti-democratic results." How do we, the people, address the Supreme Court threat? We actually have the power. It's weak, but we can strengthen it. Have the power to address this problem. Number one, in all of these points I'm going to make actually have proposals in Congress now. And President Biden a few months ago addressed this question about the Supreme Court as well. Increase the size of the court now so that more justices with different life experiences than the conservative justices on the court do now will be on the court. Every president should be able to nominate and get elected to the Supreme Court at least 2 new justices each term while they are president. Older justices could be retired to a reserve status, not removed from the court, just put into reserve status. Sounds fun. So that if a current Supreme Court justice cannot function, a justice from the reserve can be moved to active status temporarily. 2, the president and Congress can remove the Supreme Court's jurisdiction to rule in certain cases. This has happened before when, following the Civil War, the Republicans were anti-slavery and pro-voting rights for the former slaves, and they removed the court's jurisdiction in cases challenging the court's support of Reconstruction. And this is a big issue. This can be done in much smaller issues. On any particular bill that the Congress passes, it has the ability to say what court will rule with regard to its constitutionality. Limit the justices' term in office instead of allowing them to serve for life. Currently, the justices are appointed, not elected, and wield the power to determine the validity of laws which affect more than 300 million people. That's all of us. Because of the lack of time terms, they face no accountability. Note that the Constitution does not give the Supreme Court the right of final review for constitutionality of laws. Congress could and should remove that right and give the right of final review to a different court or to itself or some other not yet created body. a body which might be much more democratic in its formation and its function. Otherwise, quoting again from that same article, by contrast, when the Supreme Court decides not to enforce a federal law, the justices in the majority effectively declare that their view is superior to everyone else's. Even if the president, more than 500 members of Congress, and 4 justices interpret the Constitution as allowing a law, if 5 justices disagree, then the law is not enforced. Is that what rule by the people really looks like? So let's move on to inequality. Ever increasing levels of inequality have been a fact of life in both America and at the global level for the past several decades. And actually goes back further than that, of course, but it has really moved into high gear in the past several decades. Each year, there are more and more billionaires. Just in the United States, there are today 735 billionaires. Each of those billionaires is getting richer by the minute. Forbes magazine even has a website where any of you can visit to monitor in real time how many billions each billionaire has. And it notes on this website on any particular day if their billions have increased or decreased. If anyone needs to dwell into that, it exists. 9 of the world's top wealthiest billionaires are Americans. Forbes notes this year that there are now 14 individuals with wealth in excess of $100 billion. These 14 are worth $2 trillion in all. The expectation is that several more will join this special club next year. That 14 number is an increase of 6 just from a year before. And there was only one individual in that special club in 2000 who was worth more than $100 billion. So we see this further and further concentration of wealth and income in the very tip of the pyramid. Don't feel that they all live somewhere else in the US or the world. No, 3 of them live right here in Oregon. Phil Knight of Nike, he is number 30 on the list. Number 30. Tim Boyle, CEO of Columbia Sportswear, number 721 on the list. And Travis Bormas, founder and major owner of Dutch Boys Coffee, who owns more than 60 million shares and is number, he's so far down the list, 1,643 on the list, but still, he's in that club. An ever-increasing gap develops between the top 1% of income earners and wealth holders and the rest of us. The Oregon Center for Public Policy reported that Oregon's 3 billionaires together have about twice the wealth as the entire bottom half of Oregonians. Further, the center reported that the wealthiest 10th of Oregonians altogether own more than the wealthiest 10th of Oregonians together own more than 3/4 of the wealth in the state. That's concentration. Senator Warren reported in 2021 the US's 661 billionaires at that time had a total wealth of $4.26 trillion. In contrast to that, the total wealth of the bottom 50% of all households, that's 165 million people, had only 2.4. So 661 had 4.26 trillion, and the bottom half had 2.4 trillion. Democratic theory says that democracies function well when all individuals have a feeling of having equal standing in society, whether they have more or less income or wealth. The rich and poor should feel equal before the law and government, but feeling equal is not enough. For such equal standing to exist, in fact, some degree of wealth equality is needed as well. Economic inequality poses serious problems for democracy. If those at the bottom believe that the system favors the already wealthy, they will increasingly want to disrupt the system until it moves to redistribute the wealth back down, creating unrest, distrust in the system, and perhaps going all the way to revolution. That is the beginning of our nation, is exactly that kind of concentration of wealth and distrust for the system. The folks on the lower rungs of the economic ladder feel that the system was rigged against them. How could they not? That is a large part of the appeal of strongman governments, like Trump here in the United States. People who are in the lower 10% or less of the income and wealth curves feel that political activities on their parts will not improve their economic status. Hope goes away. And with the loss of hope, any feeling that the system will ever benefit them is also lost. Such people can be seen when people join hate campaigns directed at other people. Hate grows, as does the feeling that armed rebellion against the nation's elites is the only answer. We see this thinking by those who attack Congress, as well as those who entered the Oregon State Capitol a couple of years ago. The Occupy Wall Street movement a couple of decades ago is a reflection of this thinking. People become more and more alienated and divided. So the only way to address this is to work to reduce the gap between the wealthy, those in the top 1/10 of 1%, or even the top 10% of our population, and those who are not at the top of this wealth and income pyramids. The world and America experiences ever increasing desperation by the poorest people, with more homeless people, more people hungry, more people with no hope that the world is getting better for them. So what do? Here's some ideas. Increasing taxes on the wealth of the most rich is a good start, starting with a bill introduced by Senator Merkley and others titled the Millionaire Surtax Bill, S 2028. It was introduced in the House as well as in the Senate. In the House, it's HB 3805. Another bill to support would be the Ultra Millionaire Tax Act, S 510, co-introduced into the Senate by our Senator Merkley with Senator Warren and others. And in the House, it is HR 1459. Enact Medicare for all is another good start. The most regressive tax in America is the Social Security tax. A good start there would be to remove the cap currently at $168,600 on who has to pay the tax, or even better would be to make it a progressive tax, applying more heavily to the richest and decreasing as we go down the income levels. Another solution is increasing the federal minimum wage to at least $15 an hour. You can currently barely survive on $15 an hour. Better yet would be to increase it to a livable wage of $24 an hour. But currently, the federal minimum wage is only $7.25 per hour. It's been stuck there since 2009. And the federal and state governments should enact legislation to support the growth of labor unions, support the PRO Act, the Protect the Right to Organize Act is a great start for supporting labor unions. So I suggest that everyone here direct some questions to your U.S. representatives and your U.S. senators. Questions such as, where are you at with this ever increasing income and wage gap? Don't you think addressing the ever-increasing gap is important to Oregonians? Should you not talk about this and advocate policies which will reduce the gap? Ask them at their next town hall meeting. I am betting that most of you go to town hall meetings. I bet I can see you smiling. And you too. So great. So it's time to ask them wherever you encounter them on Facebook. They all have Facebook pages, and they almost all allow you, if you're friends with them, to post to them. So put some pressure on them. It is really amazing to me that this is one of the topics that is virtually never addressed by our federally elected officials. And it's in their bailiwick to address this problem. So let's get into the question about how democracy interacts with the military-industrial complex. What is democracy and militarism? Democracy, as you likely know, because you live in the self-proclaimed greatest democracy in the world, we like to puff ourselves up, is ruled by the people. One form of democracy can take is representative democracy, in which we, the people, elect representatives to enact laws and regulations that we, including corporations, are supposed to live by. Generally, we do, but really, really large corporations are constantly trying to overturn the laws which affect them that we enact. And we know that democracy can be real or just a facade over a system which is in fact less than democratic. Democracy in form, but not in reality. This is what we as Americans experience as we go to vote every 2 years, but with few meaningful choices. Did anyone run for city office without being opposed to homelessness? All the same choices. Basically, they didn't tell you how. They all said they were opposed to it and they were going to do something about it, but very few concrete examples of what they would do. Those are not choices. I'm sorry, I digress. With few meaningful choices and a real governing structure composed of multinational corporations, the super wealthy, and the military. On the other hand, militarism is a system of governance which allows decision-making either by or in the interests of the military. In the interests of the military, including those national, multinational corporations which are fed by the new $895 billion U.S. war budget, which was just approved by both the House and the Senate. President Eisenhower warned Americans of the dangers which the military-industrial complex poses to democracy and to all of us. According to President Eisenhower, World War II had demonstrated the need to develop a strong armaments industry to defend the American people. Prior to World War II, the war industry was primarily a farmer or a blacksmith who hammered out horseshoes, changing their activities to make guns. And now we had a huge industry as a result of World War II. In 1961, in Eisenhower's farewell address to the nation, he warned, quote, "The conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. Yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist." So American people evidently heard the words, but did next to nothing to actually act against those grave implications. He spoke his words of warning on the dangers posed by the military-industrial complex at the end of his last term in office, when he was least able to do anything about the danger other than issuing the warning. The power of this complex to undermine democracies is seen with the near unanimous congressional vote each year in favor of an ever-increasing war budget. That ever-increasing budget represents close to 50% of the nation's discretionary budget. 50%. Larger than the combined budgets of the departments of state, agriculture, labor, health and human services, transportation, justice, housing and urban development, the EPA, Army Corps of Engineers, FEMA, and legislative expenses and more. It is larger than all of those combined. In the 5-year period from 2017 to 2022, the annual defense budget had increased from $648 to $875 billion. Even in 2000, 17 years before, actually just 24 years ago, the annual budget defense spending was only $320 billion. This year, 884 or 93, something. Yet the projected fiscal year 2025 budget will be at least $895 billion. That is more than 9/10 of $1 trillion. That would be almost $9 trillion over the next decade if the budget each year was 895. All of that going to war and to the military. But even this massive, almost $1 trillion budget is just a baseline, with further emergency allocations for the wars in Ukraine against Russia, for Israel's war throughout the Middle East, and for the militarization of the Pacific to be expected. But whatever new war the powers, or whatever new war the powers that be think up. Since February 2022, the U.S. has provoked Ukraine. They have provoked Ukraine, but that's not my word. Has provided Ukraine with over $61 billion in weapons. Over the past year, the U.S. has given $18 billion in weapons to Israel for use in the Gaza genocide and the war throughout the Middle East. But the threat to democracy is more than just the outside spending. The real danger is in the amount of the money the military industrial complex spends lobbying Congress and for funding political campaigns. The complex has at least one lobbyist for every member of Congress. In figures released by Open Secrets, in 2022, 15 defense contractors contributed more than $2.6 million to the House Armed Services Committee members. Among those corporations, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon Technologies, BAE Systems, Northrop, Boeing, and more. But it's not just members of the House Armed Services Committee that benefit from this defense sector political contributions. Open Secrets also reports that during the 2022 election cycle, members of the Senate Armed Services Committee received $1.2 million. And naturally, they didn't actually have to be a member of either of those committees to get money from the military contractors. In fact, major defense contractors still had lots of money to spread among the other members of both the House and the Senate, Democrats and Republicans. I will bet that if I looked, I would find even that the independents in Congress are getting military donations, including Bernie Sanders. In addition to the political contributions, lobbying by defense sector companies amounted to more than $139 million in 2023. In that same year, There were 904 defense industry lobbyists. There are only 535 members of Congress. So members of Congress were outnumbered by the defense industry lobbyists by 370 people. These figures again can't come from open secrets. And there is the revolving door of government defense officials and retired military officers moving into the employ of major defense contractors. And the revolving door, of course, swings the other way with former CEOs and other high-ranking defense contractors taking positions in the Department of Defense and other defense agencies. And then they revolve back again. It just keeps revolving. In either case, the appearance of conflicts of interest undermines any trust that citizens have that their government is actually working for them. President Trump, in his first term, issued an order forbidding the hiring of corporate executives, but then he violated his own rule over and over again, including for his Secretary of State, James Mathis, a former board member of General Dynamics. His deputy secretary came from Boeing, the Pentagon's second largest contractor. And then President Biden followed Trump by choosing Lloyd Austin as his Secretary of Defense, a former board member of Raytheon, after having retired as a U.S. four-star general. And the defense industries undermine American democracy by giving massive campaign contributions to members of Congress, especially to members of the Appropriations Committee and the Senate and House Armed Services Committee. Sorry, that was a little redundant. All of this has had damaging effects on America and the world. During the past 6 decades, America has been, virtually all my life, has been, and I'll say virtually all of your lives, has been at war constantly following the Second World War, beginning with the Korean and Vietnam Wars, continuing with the Gulf War, the Balkan Wars, the war on Iraq and Afghanistan, the war in Kuwait, and currently our war via our proxy Ukraine with Russia. And we are just itching to get started with China using Taiwan as a proxy. The military-industrial complex influences, manipulates, and controls American politics at every level of American government, resulting in an American war on the world. The only solution to end the military-industrial complex's domination is to cut the federal military budget. Proposals in Congress to do so seem to be gaining in strength, both in and out of Congress. Call your U.S. reps and U.S. senators and tell them that you want the defense budget cut dramatically now, and that the money should instead be spent on activities that support the peaceful aspirations of the American people, like Medicare for all, universal child care, repair of our broken water systems, and moving to a green economy. The money could be used to fund our COP of obligations to the least developed nations to help them deal with the consequences of the global climate crisis. Stop the endless wars now. Move the money. We know the power of American militarism from several measures which indicate the effect on our democracy itself, as well as our ever worsening environment, healthcare, housing, and inequality crisis. The first effect is on the First Amendment, the right to free speech and a free press. I mentioned that the annual war budget is a bipartisan effort, bipartisan, not to discuss the issues, but to rush the process and get it approved with huge majorities, generally. First on the approval process to get both the House and the Senate Armed Services Committee to each individually agree to a figure. Generally, that agreed on figure is larger than what the president and the Pentagon want and had actually requested. This is in part because Congress has required that each of the services submit their own list of priorities, which the president's budget does not cover. This is an opportunity for major contractors to get the ear of members of these committees advocating for gravy projects within their own districts. The members are happy to agree because they get to chirp to their constituents about all the jobs that are being created in their home districts. Never mind that funding jobs in the military industrial complex has proven to be a much less effective way to create jobs than if the same amount of money was spent elsewhere. For instance, to create green jobs to address the climate crisis, which we actually need. The other reason for the success of the military industrial complex is that the complex provides a major source of funds to political campaigns, political bribes, especially for members of the House and Senate Armed Services Committees. In figures released by Open Secrets, in 2022, 15 defense contractors contributed more than $2.3 million to House Armed Services Committee members. Among those corporations, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon Industry Technologies, BAE Systems, Northrop, Boeing, and more. It's not just members. Didn't I just say this? Am I repeating myself? Or have I gone through this so many times? I don't know where I'm at. Okay, so I guess I'm not repeating myself. It is not just members of the House Armed Services Committee that benefits on defense sector political contributions. Open Secrets also reports that during the 2022 election cycle, members of the Senate Armed Services Committee received $1.2 million. Now that figure is lower than for the House, but there are far fewer members in the Senate than there are in the House. And naturally, you didn't have to be a member of those committees to receive political contributions. In fact, major defense contractors still had lots of money to spread among other members of both the House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans. In addition to the political contributions, lobbying by defense sector companies amounted to more than $139 million in 2023. In that same year, there were 904 defense industry lobbyists. There were only 535 members of Congress. Members of Congress were outnumbered by lobbyists by 370 people. Those figures, again, are all from Open Secrets. Another source of the complex's power comes from the revolving door, which sees high-ranking members of the military leave and gain high-ranking corporate positions in the war corporations. And the reverse happens just as well. An example is our present Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. Before becoming Secretary of State, Mr. Austin served as a 4-star general. After retiring, he joined the board of Raytheon Technologies. He was still on that board when he was nominated to be Secretary of State of Defense. The war industry determines the government's pro-war narrative by funding think tanks and media. These think tanks create and amplify threats and justify a global military posture. Revolving door participants regularly pen opinion pieces in major publications without fully disclosing their personal war profiteering. American militarism comes at high cost to the lives of real human beings. Overinvestment in the military comes at the high cost of underinvesting in other needs, including addressing the climate crisis and the homeless crisis. As noted before, American militarism has had damaging effects on America and the world. During the past 7 decades, America has been at war constantly, beginning with the Korean War, moving to the Vietnam War, and continuing with the Gulf War, the Balkan Wars, the war on Iraq and Afghanistan, the war in Kuwait, and currently our war via our proxy, Ukraine, with Russia. And we're just itching to get started with China using Taiwan as our proxy. The National Priorities Project looks at what all those military budgets amount to and what they could buy instead. Their website allows you to look at specific trade downs. Just looking at Oregon taxpayers, since 2001, Oregon taxpayers have paid more than $75 billion for the total cost of war, just Oregonians. What might that money have bought instead? Just as an example, we could provide more than 32 million homes with wind power, scholarships for almost 317,000 university students for 4 years, hire more than 133,000 elementary school teachers, build almost 1.5 million public housing units, create more than 348,000 new jobs, paying $15 an hour with benefits. After paying for all of that, we would still have almost $100,000 left over. And that is just based on the tax expenses paid by Oregonians. A couple years ago, I was on a National Unitarian Universalist Zoom call, and one person said she needed to write a sermon on militarism and was concerned that she could not be nonpartisan. My response was that she need not worry she need not be concerned, because militarism is one of the most nonpartisan issues around. Because of the ever-developing military-industrial complex, each year the war budget, also known as the National Defense Authorization Act, is enthusiastically endorsed, enacted with large majorities of Democrats and Republicans in Congress, except for the past couple of years, when more Democrats felt they needed to vote no because of the poison pills which the Republicans had put into the bill regarding trans and abortion issues. Very recently, the House voted approval of the 2025 National Defense Authorization Act, amounting to $895 billion, with a vote of 281 yes versus 150 no. And on 12/19, a few days ago, the House adopted the same bill by a vote of 85 yes to 14 no. By the way, that bill was 1,800 pages long. They detail everything out. And the actual text, if you want to look at it, is actually available on well, I found it on a couple of websites. You just need to search for it. Oregon's 2 senators voted no, as did both senators from Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Jersey. Usually Oregon and Massachusetts are the only states with having both their senators voting no. This year, the senators voted no due to the Republican poison pills, as I mentioned before, not because they had any fundamental opposition to spending that much money or opposition to funding war in general. I need to take a moment.
Good, Dave. Yeah. Dave,
I
yeah,
will
this'll give us,
say one more thing.
yeah, go ahead
You
and do
all
your
had
closing.
this sheet on your chair, or it was handed to you. Take a look at this. This details out 4 bills that are in Congress right now that would make a big step toward cutting the power of the military industrial complex. And so each one of these has a note about who in Oregon already supports them and who does not, which ones are introduced into the House and which are into the Senate or not. So my question, my ask of you is for each of you to take this list and take one of these bills every week for the next 4, actually there's 2 more in the back. One of these bills every week and call your U.S. representatives and your U.S. senators and tell them that you want them to co-sponsor this legislation. This would be huge. Surprisingly, our representatives don't hear from us very often. And when they do, it does make a difference. Okay. So I'll let it go at that, and I am open to questions.
Dave, what I always hear over and over again in news broadcasts and is that Medicare and the social programs are the big money, and that the military somehow the military is so much less. And if you look at charts, sometimes it's like just a small portion. How do they get away with this? I mean, why are they saying that these social programs are such a big portion of
Well,
our?
the social programs, Social Security and Medicare, both have their independent funding sources. So while they are part of the entire federal budget, they are not part of the discretionary budget. So all of these other departments that I've made note of are all part of the discretionary budget. And the war budget is more than 50% of that. So the other social justice, social Medicare and Social Security have their own funds. Congress does not budget for those. And that's why you hear this constant clamor for cutting
Yes.
the budgets for those, but increasing the budget for the military.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Now, there is a comment from the Zoom audience. How do we get the printout? And I'll make sure that we get it emailed out to our membership.
Okay,
Okay.
I'll get it to you.
No,
Oh,
yeah, if you give us the digital
the
copy,
original, yes.
then we can get it to our membership.
Okay,
That's
very good.
wonderful.
Uh-huh.
Gretchen has a comment. I recall that Eisenhower originally intended to warn of the dangers of the military congressional complex, but she thinks, but he gave in to this pressure. Any comment?
I recall that Eisenhower originally intended to warn the danger of military, industrial, and congressional, but removed the word congressional at some point due to pressure. Do you have any comments?
Yes, yeah, and that's
Thank you,
correct.
David, for the clarification.
So I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well,
Oh,
and I need to stop.
yes.
And I really apologize.
No, Dave, it's
Um,
fine.